Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Biden's Middle East visit. I hope nobody was really counting on anything special to emerge from the U.S. President Joe Biden's Middle East visit. I'm referring to Israelis, Palestinians, Saudis, in fact, to the entire Middle East. I'm speaking especially to citizens of the United States of America also. What could be expected were those special Biden moments, his humor, accompanied by faux pas, of course, and at least a few malaprops or spoonerisms. Anyone looking for progress or policy changes or profundity into the dynamics of this region should have lowered their expectations to avoid disappointment. This was Biden's 10th trip to Israel. At first, it's important to recognize that it's his first as a U.S. president. And a subtle purpose was lurking behind his trip. The U.S. president, as all leaders to Israel do, they visit the obvious places, Yad Vashem, the National Holocaust Museum. He was escorted to military bases. He inspected the Iron Dome and even the newer laser beam anti-missile defense system called the Iron Beam Laser Rocket Project. The two projects, the Iron Dome and the Laser Rocket Project, were designed together. It's the same basic principle. Biden reacquainted himself with Israel's caretaker Prime Minister, Yair Lapid. Before this visit, they had met only once before, and that was in 2013. The objective now was to solidify the relationship and keep U.S.-Israel bonds strong. The meeting was a polite, albeit perfunctory meeting. Given that Israeli elections are scheduled for November 1st, the caretaker prime minister does not have an ability to change Israeli policy. Biden also met with former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. They met twice during the past year, but that has no bearing on what happens from here on. Also, former Prime Minister Benjamin, or Bibi, Netanyahu also met with the U.S. president. Here there is tension. Not so obvious, but it's there. The U.S. president needed to meet with Bibi because the head of the opposition is so important, and it can't appear that the U.S. president is taking sides in the upcoming election in Israel. They've known one another for decades, and the relationship has weathered some real rough patches. Recently, Bibi even posted a video of Biden snoozing during a meeting with Bennett at the White House. That video, by the way, has been disproven. It was fake. It's fake news. But Bibi sent it out for everyone to see and snicker. Their relationship hit its lowest point in 2010 when Biden was then vice president and was on a trip to Israel. Bibi, then prime minister, announced a new community built over the Green Line in northeast Jerusalem. Biden was apoplectic. They were both professionals, so yes, the meeting went well. There was a very unique first in Biden's visit also, something that may have significant impact on the future Israel-U.S.-Palestinian interaction, especially vis-a-vis Jerusalem. It was the subtle purpose propelling this visit. On Friday morning, U.S. President Biden visited Augusta Victoria Hospital on Jerusalem's Mount of Olives. Augusta Victoria is firmly ensconced in what is commonly called Arab East Jerusalem. This visit was a historic first for any sitting president. It was a visit to a significant part of Jerusalem outside of the Old City. The hospital is one of 6 in East Jerusalem. These hospitals care for residents of Jerusalem, the West Bank, and even Gaza, operating under a loose relationship with Israel's Ministry of Health. Most of the funding comes from the Lutheran World Federation and from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, aka UNRWA. This UN agency has shown a decided bent away from Israel. That's a polite way of saying anti-Israel. President Biden announced a United States initiative to assist the hospital system. The president is hoping that at least some Gulf states will concomitantly announce their support for the East Jerusalem Hospital Project system. In the first meeting between Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and the U.S. president since the PA stepped away from U.S.-sponsored diplomacy following Donald Trump's moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Biden met with Abbas in Bethlehem. Details are still sketchy, but Biden probably promised that he will convince Israel to make concessions. Abbas is not in good health right now, and he and his team are not holding their breath for U.S. promises to come to fruition, but at least they met. After his meeting with Abbas, Biden went directly to the airport to fly to Saudi Arabia. This, too, was a somewhat unique flight because it's happened before, but very seldom do planes fly directly from Tel Aviv to Saudi Arabia, to Jeddah in this case. In Saudi Arabia, Biden attended the GCC3 summit with leaders of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which are Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, along with three, Iraq, Egypt, and Jordan. Saudis were not awaiting Biden's arrival with open arms. They have been insulted by the American president. During the American president's campaign, Joe Biden called the Saudi Arabian state a pariah state. Washington continues to call out Saudi Arabia for human rights offenses. And Biden had serious critique for Saudi Arabia's brutal murder of American Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. For these reasons, the Saudis are not readily amenable to U.S. requests to pump more oil and dump it into the world market to drive down the price. As an aside, during the 1930s, members of the Nazi Party of Jerusalem held their meetings under the leadership of Ludwig Buchhalter at Augusta Victoria Hospital, the exact hospital that Joe Biden chose to visit. A mere coincidence? Yeah, actually, I believe so. I don't think they know the history. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from Ynet. It was written by Nachum Barnea on July 8, 2022. The column is entitled, Lapid's Scant Military Experience Could Be His Undoing. And the subtitle, which is very long, Analysis. While PM is convinced he has a firm grasp of the material, he must realize that his subordinates in the defense establishment are fallible and not every action or policy they offer is sacrosanct. Nachum Barnea is very smart and very perceptive. He's always worth reading, a first-class journalist and thinker. I always learn something from his analysis. He begins his column with a short story about political aides and politicians. He writes, Back in May, I met two senior officials at the Prime Minister's office for a talk. We discussed the Prime Minister's residence on Jerusalem's Balfour Street and why didn't former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett move there even after the issue made headlines. Barnea goes on to explain that aides and the politicians they work for don't always know the entire story or the truth about events, and that lack of knowledge has consequences. In this case, to make a long story short, the aides said there was no room. The house wasn't ready for Bennett. But Lapid became prime minister, and somehow he was able to move in right away. A simple story, an illustration of a greater point. The real point of this column is that the caretaker prime minister, Yair Lapid, does not have defense experience. He lacks experiential knowledge when it comes to defense. Barnea continues, This is all the more sensitive when we talk about defense. Lapid became prime minister after being present at security consultations for a whole year. He's convinced that he has a firm grasp of the material, which is both true and false at the same time. There is a glaring difference between someone who sits through a briefing and then goes back to tend to his business and someone who must make decisions immediately. His predecessors, Yitzhak Rabin, Ehud Barak, Ariel Sharon, who got their start in military command before coming into politics, were adamant about getting down to the smallest detail. Their experience taught them about their own limitations and the importance of skepticism. Menachem Begin represented the complete opposite. This is important because Lapid actually said that he wants to emulate both Israel's first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion, and Menachem Begin, who was deceived by Ariel Sharon and was kept in the military dark. As a result, a huge debacle happened in the Lebanese war. Barnea concludes that it would be better if Lapid learned from former Prime Ministers Yitzhak Rabin and Yitzchak Shamir. He writes, he better learn from Rabin and Yitzchak Shamir. Trust, but verify. The people at the top of the defense establishment nowadays are very competent and undoubtedly dedicated to Israel. Their credibility is higher than that of the politicians. However, they too have interests, egos, and impulses that require restraint. Not everything they offer is sacrosanct. Lapid will face throughout the election campaign claims he does not possess the experience or courage required to take responsibility for military operations. His opponents will try to push to make hasty, irresponsible moves. This is the bane of every prime minister who does not come from the right. The truth is that there is no right or left when it comes to military action, certainly not in the caretaker government. What do we have? Seriousness and carelessness. And I hope Lapid would opt for the former. This is an excellent, insightful piece. Thank you, Nachum Barnea. Next up is a column by Ben Dror Yemini, someone I've used numerous times. It's also from Ynet, and it's also about Lapid. It was published on July 10th, 2022. It is entitled, Israel Must Always Reach Out for Peace, subtitled, Opinion, Lapid did well to end 5-year break with PA's Abbas despite right-wing talking heads evoking Oslo Accord boogeymen. Israel must maintain communication channels with Palestinians to further build upon Abraham Accords. It's a very long title, but it really encapsulates the entire column. This is how Ben Dror Yemini begins. The outcry over Prime Minister Yair Lapid's call to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas indicates that some of us have lost touch with the Zionist tradition. There was, and there still is, uproar in the Arab world, too, about anything smacking of détente with Israel. Some Arab nations considered the Abraham Accords as an aberration, or even a breach of the old Arab peace initiative agreements, which stipulated that peace with Israel would only come after peace with the Palestinians. Why and how could you do such a thing? Those Arab nations asked their Gulf peers in dismay. Bandar bin Sultan Al Saud, an elite diplomat who previously served as Saudi ambassador to the United States, was deployed to lobby other Arab nations around the region to recognize Israel as the national home of the Jewish people. Gleaning from his 3-part interview with Dubai-based news outlet Al Arabiya, his message was clear. It was the Palestinians who said no. They were always wrong to do so. We did everything we could to try to help them. We supported them. No cigar. Now Yemini explains that Bennett, the former prime minister's biggest mistake was not dealing with the Palestinians, and that Lapid is tackling it as one of his very first items in office. This is how Ben Dror Yemini says it. One of former Prime Minister Naftali's biggest mistakes was his refusal to talk to the Palestinians. Fortunately, 1 year out of a country of conflict won't change much. Lapid was right to kick off his premiership by tackling this issue in his first week in office, and still, in order to further build upon the Abraham Accords, strengthen the regional alliance, and encourage additional countries to join the circle of peace. We must reach out for peace and maintain communication channels with the Palestinians. The point Ben Dror Yemini is making is that Israel needs to work at making peace all the time. Even Bibi did that. And that's important to even see. His column concludes by saying, so yes, Netanyahu also understood that we must reach out for peace. He met with Yasser Arafat, he met with Mahmoud Abbas, and not just through the phone calls. It is unclear whether or not Netanyahu really meant to follow through with the well-known and lesser-known agreements he signed. But one thing is clear, he never deviated from the Zionist tradition. So why does anyone expect Lapid, of all politicians, to do so? Well done. Ben Dror Yemini's conclusion is often lost on outsiders. There is a very clear and critical line that almost all Israeli leaders have regarding defense and peace. They are very realistic, and they do not hesitate to take on non-ideological stands on issues of import to the defense and stability of Israel. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 9 cartoons and memes today. The first meme pokes fun at the former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who stepped down from his position after members of his cabinet deserted him. Johnson is on the phone. He says, "Hello, IKEA? Can I get a new cabinet?" Get it? Cabinet. Oh well, it was funny. Next up is a quote from Thomas Sowell. Sowell is one of the greatest economic and political thinkers of the past 100 years. He's still alive. He is the product of the University of Chicago and a student of Milton Friedman, who transformed him. He is so brilliant and clear-thinking. Well worth reading his stuff and watching him on YouTube. This is just one example. In this NBC interview, Sowell says, "Many of today's problems are a result of yesterday's solutions." That's just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. This next meme is a news spot from the famous annual July 4th Nathan's hot dog eating competition. Joey Chestnut, 15th time champion of the competition, is in the middle of eating hot dog number 17 of the 63 he would finally finish. When 2 animal rights activists storm the stage, he stops, puts one in a chokehold until security comes, then he gets back to the business of eating. All this while, he's hobbling on crutches. A man who won't let anything get in the way of his hot dogs. This next is one of those very honest and sadly funny ads for fireworks. It's a genre, it's all over the place. The sign reads, "Guys with an eye patch and 3 fingers sell the best fireworks." Ouch. That's very funny but very sad. The next picture is from 1927 Tour de France, a bicycle race in France. The riders are pedaling away and sharing a cigarette. Things have certainly changed over the years. This next meme is so funny. It is a critique of our society and instructions. The cleaning instructions on this garment read, "Remove child before washing." The comment on the meme says it all. It reads, "We're not going to make it, are we?" Now a meme that is just plain profound. It reads, "It amazes me how much exercise and extra fries sounds alike." There are many words that sound alike like this, but this is one of the best. Now we have a picture of a cat dressed in a towel that looks like the robes of a Buddhist monk. Everyone knows that cats love to chase that laser dot. And so the Buddhist monk / cat says, "Do not chase the red dot, for it is an illusion." Very funny. This last meme is a joke about the price of gas and inflation. We see a picture of Lee Majors and Lindsay Wagner, who starred in the long ago television series, The $6 Million Man, The $6 Million Woman. The caption reads, "In the 70s, 6 million could build a person. Now it seems to barely fill up my gas tank." In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. We've come a long way from 1927 Tour de France we just saw in the meme. Today, in 2022, Israel's cycling team is making Tour de France headlines. Simon Clark, an Israeli cyclist and team member, won stage 5 in the Tour de France. This is the first time an Israeli team member has ever won any segment of the Tour de France. Clark pulled out a win in the final 50 meters of this portion of the competition. The name of the team is Israel's Premier Tech. Originally, it was called Team Israel Startup Nation. It was established in 2014 and joined the World Tour in 2019. The team competed in 2020 Tour de France also, and has now partnered with the Canadian company Premier Tech for the 2022 season. Renamed Israel Premier Tech, the team roster consists of 8 riders, including Guy Neve, an Israeli. A second Israeli rider named Omer Goldstein was scheduled to compete, but was forced to give up his place after he was exposed to COVID. He was replaced by a Canadian, Julien Bovin, Tour de France is a world-renowned bicycle race that covers 2,000 miles in 23 days. ISIS is once again on the attack, and ISIS is succeeding in the mission. They are striking sites, especially prisons, and freeing hundreds of their captured commanders and soldiers. ISIS claimed responsibility for a raid on a Nigerian prison in the capital of Abuja. The raid freed around 400 ISIS inmates. These former inmates are now fighters, and they will join other fighting groups. ISIS is gaining strength. Shuaib Belgori, permanent secretary of the Nigerian Interior Ministry, spoke to journalists gathered outside this prison. He told them that the prison houses 900 inmates and that one security officer was killed during the raid and 3 others were injured. A total of 879 inmates fled, according to a statement released by the Nigerian Prison Service. 4 inmates were killed and 16 were injured. 443 are still at large. The remainder have been recaptured. The 443 unaccounted for inmates have almost certainly escaped with ISIS. That was, after all, the purpose of the prison break. A Russian missile hit a tanker that has been drifting in the Black Sea for over 4 months carrying diesel fuel. The Interfax Ukraine news agency reported the hit, citing Ukraine's military, which called the ship an ecological bomb. The Moldova-flagged tanker, Millennia Spirit, has now been struck by Russian twice since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th. It was first hit with a missile and fired from a warship mere days after the invasion began. At that time, the Moldova claimed that the ship had a Russian crew and that 2 crew members were seriously wounded. Hitting a tanker and causing a spill could result in one of the most serious environmental disasters in decades in the area. But it does not surprise me that Russia would be so cavalier about ecology. The West should have stepped in immediately and grabbed that tanker and offloaded the diesel. Now, unfortunately, it might be too late. Iran is playing a nuclear enrichment game. Iranian and Western press are reporting that Iran not just is enriching uranium, they're increasing their uranium enrichment. Iranians are now using more advanced machines to achieve their enrichment goals. It's happening at Fordow, Iran's underground nuclear facility. The reports describe that in Fordow, as opposed to the other nuclear facilities, Iran can easily change between enrichment levels. Changing between enrichment levels means increasing enrichment in general. The IAEA, the Atomic Energy Watchdog Group of the United Nations, has reported on Iran's nuclear status, and the Iranian press has verified the report. Western diplomats in the IAEA have been concerned about these advanced devices and the goings-on at Fordow for a very long time now. With these centrifuges, so-called modified subheaders, it means that Iran can switch more quickly and easily and enrich at extremely high levels of purity for uranium. Iran is required to inform the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, about any change in enrichment, but Iran, as we all know, does not believe in being compliant. Iran does not play by the rules. Prime Minister Yair Lapid announced that Israel maintains freedom of action against Iran's nuclear program. During his remarks at the opening meeting, his weekly meeting of the cabinet, Lapid did not mince words when he said, Israel reserves political and military freedom of action in fighting the Iranian nuclear program. That's a quote. In that same meeting, Israel's caretaker prime minister also appealed to Middle Eastern Sunni Muslim countries to engage in steps of rapprochement with Israel. Speaking for the benefit, he says, Israel extends a hand to the countries of the region and calls to change history for the sake of our children. Israel is issuing their message loudly and clearly, and for everyone to hear. Iran is the most significant threat to the regional stability, and all nations in the region should join forces to prevent them from attaining nuclear capabilities, especially nuclear weapons. Israel's regional cooperation minister has asked Saudi Arabia to allow direct flights from Tel Aviv to Riyadh for Muslim pilgrims. Israeli officials have been seeking expanded permission for their airlines to fly over Saudi soil to better reach Asian destinations. A person in Washington who was familiar with the matter said that new aviation deals sought by Israel could be announced around the time of Biden's visit, but that the details still need to be worked out and may not be completed in time. Israel's regional cooperation minister, Asawi Fayez, is a member of Israel's 18% Muslim minority. Speaking as both a Muslim and a member of the government, he said, "I want to see the day when I can depart from Ben Gurion Airport near Tel Aviv to Jeddah to fulfill my religious obligation of a pilgrimage to Mecca. I took this matter up with Saudi Arabia, and I really hope the day will come," he told Israel's Army Radio, without expanding on where or when such discussions took place. Saudi Arabia has long admitted Muslim pilgrims from Israel, but they must travel through third-party countries to get there. That ends up costing around $11,500 for a week-long stay, Fayed said. Pilgrims from neighboring Arab countries pay around half that much for their travel. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the term Middle East is a very new term? It originated in the British Foreign Office in the 1850s and came into usage only after Alfred Thayer Mann, a U.S. naval strategist, used it in an article in 1902 in the National Review, a British magazine. He meant it to mean the area between India and Arabia. The term Middle East was intended to replace the term Near East. But Near East, by the way, is still used in history. It's referred to, let's say, as the ancient Near East, also in archaeology. There are those who have problems with the term. They say that to call it the Middle East is Eurocentric because it means the area between Europe and the Far East, as opposed to calling them Far East and Near East. The people who are offended by the term Middle East are the same people who are trying to change other terms in English. Both the definition and the borders of the Middle East regularly shift. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.